When we picture ancient Egypt, what springs to mind? I bet it's towering pyramids piercing a brilliant blue sky. Or perhaps it's the glint of gold from Tutankhamun's famous mask. We imagine powerful pharaohs, mysterious gods with animal heads, and secret tombs filled with untold treasures. These are the blockbuster images, the headlines of history. But behind all that splendor, behind every colossal statue and every intricately painted coffin, there was something else. Something far less glamorous, but honestly infinitely more important. There was an economy, a complex, humming, and surprisingly sophisticated system for managing wealth, resources, and people. It was the engine that powered a civilization for 3,000 years. Think of it like this. A pyramid is not just a pile of stones. It's a monumental feat of project management. It required feeding thousands of workers, quarrying and transporting millions of tons of limestone, and organizing a workforce with military precision. All of that costs something. Not in pounds or dollars, which didn't exist yet, but in resources. Grain, beer, linen, and labor. The pharaoh was the ultimate celebrity of the ancient world. He was a living god, the son of Ra, the divine link between the heavens and the earth. His image was everywhere, carved into temple walls and towering over his subjects as a colossal statue. He wore 2 crowns, one for Upper Egypt and one for Lower Egypt, symbolizing his rule over a united kingdom, but he effectively wore another invisible crown, that of the chief economist. You see, in ancient Egypt, the king didn't just rule the people, he owned everything. The land, the water, the mines, the livestock, and in a way, the people themselves. He was the CEO of Egypt Inc. This absolute ownership gave the pharaoh immense power, but also immense responsibility. To manage this vast enterprise, the pharaoh couldn't do it all himself, of course. He was at the top of a huge pyramid of bureaucracy, and I don't mean the stone kind. His right-hand man was the vizier, a sort of prime minister and chief justice rolled into one. Beneath the vizier were overseers, officials, and legions of scribes. These scribes were the unsung heroes of the Egyptian economy. They were the accountants, the data analysts, the civil servants of their day. Their meticulous records, written on papyrus, gave the pharaoh the data he needed to run the country. Nobody likes paying taxes, do they? It's a universal grumble. But in ancient Egypt, taxes were the very lifeblood of the state. Without them, there would be no pyramids, no temples, and no pharaohs living in luxury. But how do you collect taxes in a world without money? You can't just write a check to the Egyptian equivalent of HMRC. The answer was simple and ingenious. You tax what people have. For the vast majority of Egyptians, who were farmers, this meant one thing above all else: grain. Grain was the currency of Egypt. It was food, it was wealth, it was power. The tax collection process was a highly organized annual event. After the harvest, when the fields were golden with wheat and barley, the tax assessors would arrive. These were state officials, usually scribes, armed with measuring ropes and writing pallets. They would measure the size and quality of each farmer's fields and estimate the total yield. A certain percentage of that yield, sometimes as high as 50%, was then claimed for the state. But what if you weren't a farmer? What if you were a craftsman, a fisherman, or a potter? You still had to pay your dues. Instead of grain, you would pay your taxes in kind, with a portion of whatever you produced. A potter might give a certain number of jars, a weaver a quantity of linen cloth, and a fisherman a share of his catch. And then there was another, very different kind of tax: labor. This was known as the corvée. For a certain period each year, usually during the Nile's inundation when farming was impossible, ordinary men could be called up for national service. The entire Egyptian economy can be summed up in one word: Nile. This magnificent river was the source of all life and all wealth. Every year, like clockwork, it would flood its banks, depositing a thick layer of rich, black silt. This incredibly fertile soil made agriculture astonishingly productive. Farmers could often grow 2 or even 3 crops a year with relatively little effort. The primary crops were emmer wheat, for making the bread that was the staple of every Egyptian's diet, and barley, for brewing the all-important beer. The predictable generosity of the Nile meant that Egypt almost always had a surplus of food, the fundamental building block of a powerful and stable society. This agricultural abundance was the engine of the economy, but the Nile was also its main highway. The river flowed from south to north, while the prevailing wind blew from north to south. This happy coincidence meant that boats could drift downstream with the current and sail upstream with the wind. The Nile was a bustling corridor of commerce, connecting the entire length of the country. Boats laden with grain from the south would travel north to feed the great cities like Memphis and Thebes. In the other direction, ships would carry manufactured goods like pottery, textiles, and papyrus to the provinces. Without the Nile, Egypt would have been a collection of isolated villages, not a unified economic powerhouse. Beyond farming, crafts and industry flourished. In workshops attached to palaces and temples, skilled artisans produced an incredible array of goods. Carpenters made furniture, jewelers worked with gold and semi-precious stones, and weavers created fine linen cloth that was famous throughout the ancient world. Stonemasons and sculptors carved the statues and reliefs that adorned the temples. The temples themselves were huge economic institutions. They were not just places of worship. They were vast estates with their own land, livestock, workers, and workshops. They functioned almost like corporations, generating their own income from their agricultural holdings and craft production. Comparing our modern tax system with that of the ancient Egyptians is a bit like comparing an iPhone to a carrier pigeon. Both are designed to send a message, but the technology is worlds apart. Today, most of us pay taxes with money that is automatically deducted from our bank accounts or paychecks. We deal with abstract numbers on a screen, and the whole process is largely invisible. For an ancient Egyptian, tax was anything but abstract. It was tangible, physical, and deeply personal. You didn't transfer funds, you handed over the fruits of your labor. It was a system built on things, not figures. Imagine you're a farmer today. You sell your crops for money, and at the end of the year, you or your accountant calculate your income, fill out a tax form, and send a payment to the government. Now let's rewind 3,000 years. You're an Egyptian farmer. The taxman doesn't ask for your accounts. He comes to your field. He measures your land, estimates your harvest, and then his men physically take a portion of your grain. Your tax payment isn't a number in a ledger. It's a pile of wheat being loaded onto a donkey. The process was immediate and direct. You could literally watch your tax liability being carried away. This fundamental difference extends to what was taxed. We have a whole menu of taxes: income tax, sales tax, VAT, property tax, corporation tax. It's a complex web designed to capture wealth in its many modern forms. The Egyptian system was much simpler, focusing on the two main sources of wealth in their society: production and labor. They taxed what you made, whether it was grain from your field or pots from your kiln, and they taxed your time through the corvée system. Yet, for all their differences, the purpose of taxes was remarkably similar. In both ancient Egypt and our modern world, taxes fund the state. In that sense, the Egyptian farmer giving up his grain and the modern office worker paying their income tax are part of the same timeless story: citizens contributing to the collective good and the stability of their society. So, how did this ancient kingdom, built on grain and powered by the Nile, manage to last for 3 millennia? Dynasties rose and fell, invaders came and went, but the fundamental structure of Egyptian civilization remained remarkably constant. The secret to this incredible longevity wasn't military might or magical spells. It was the sheer robustness and resilience of its economic system. The system was a masterpiece of stability, designed to weather almost any storm. It was a blueprint for endurance, and it worked spectacularly well for a very, very long time. The first pillar of this stability was centralization. With the pharaoh at the top, owning everything and controlling everything, the state could mobilize resources on a massive scale. It could direct labor to where it was needed most, whether that was building a defensive fort or digging a new irrigation canal. The second pillar was the system of redistribution, with the granary at its heart. By storing vast surpluses of grain during good years, the state created a buffer against disaster. When the Nile flood was poor and harvests failed, the government could open the storehouses and distribute food to prevent widespread famine. Finally, the system was successful because it was deeply integrated with Egyptian culture and religion. The economy wasn't just about practicalities, it was an expression of Ma'at, the core Egyptian concept of cosmic order, truth, and justice. Paying your taxes, working on the pharaoh's tomb, and contributing to the wealth of the temple were seen as religious duties. It was part of maintaining the divine order of the universe. This powerful ideology gave the economic system a legitimacy that went far beyond mere government decree. It made every farmer and every craftsman a participant in a sacred national project, building a civilization not just for themselves but for